Hey everybody, we're just getting started. We'll wait a couple minutes for everyone to file in, and then we'll get going. So I think we'll start at like 1:03, and then yeah. All right. Welcome everybody. We'll have Shalini introduce, kind of set the stage for us all, and let's get going.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for joining, and thank you to our amazing panelists and moderators. We're really excited for today's conversation focused on combating racism in health professions education. And this is really a space for students, about students to really share ideas and come together. But everyone is welcome. So we're really excited for everyone who joined today. And this is part of our Health Professions Education Leaders Pushing for Change webinar series, which aims to highlight health profession education students who are leaders in this space and really looking to cultivate a sense of community. So this webinar is co-hosted by the Beyond Flexner Alliance, which is a national movement focused on health equity and training health professionals as agents of more equitable healthcare. This movement takes us beyond centuries-old conversations in health professions education to train providers to build a system that is not only better, but fairer. And this webinar is also done in coalition with the Organization for Associate Degree in Nursing, OADN. And OADN is recognized nationally as the voice and advocate for over 1,100 community college nursing programs across the country. OADN ensures that the associate degree nursing remains a pathway for a diverse spectrum of students, enriching the profession and meeting the healthcare needs of patients, families, and communities. OADN represents over 50% of all newly licensed professional registered nurses, which equates to an average of 81,000 RNs annually. OADN's vision is to expand networks that promote leadership, collaboration, and advocacy to further enrich nursing education and the communities we serve. So we're really thankful for our partners and everyone for joining today.
Thanks, Shalini. Racism is present in every facet of social life. It fuels structural inequalities, radicalized oppression, and health disparities. People of color remain deeply underrepresented in health professions education, Learner experiences across the health education continuum are constantly fraught with bias, and current approaches to teaching insufficiently challenge structural inequalities. The disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on the Black, Latinx, and Indigenous communities has further illustrated the significance that structural factors, including those within health systems, have on health outcomes. In tonight's webinar, we will be discussing structural racism and its impact on health profession students from marginalized communities, the role health professions education plays in perpetuating racism, and how faculty and students can hold these institutions accountable.
Thanks, Katrina. So we'll go ahead and introduce our panel. So first we have Jaylisa Casimir. How about Jaylisa, you can tell us about yourself.
Hello, everyone. So as said, my name is Jaylisa Casimir, and I'm currently a first-year medical student at the CUNY School of Medicine, which is basically the medical school portion of the Sophie Davis Biomedical Education Program, which is a 7-year accelerated medical program, 3 years undergrad, 4 years grad. So I'm in the 4th year of the program, and I'm very happy to be on the panel today. And yeah.
Awesome. Next we have Dao Ho.
Hi everyone, I'm Dow. I'm from Kansas City, Missouri, and I'm a 2nd-year PA student. And I'm happy to be here. So I'm on my thesis month right now, but I'm about halfway through my clinical year.
Awesome. And last we have Grace Lowe.
Hi, I'm Grace. I grew up in Houston, Texas, and I'm currently in Arizona attending the PA program here, AT Still University. I'm a first-year PA student, so I'm about like 3/4 of the way through my first year, and I'm excited for my clinical year.
Awesome. And then moderating will be myself. I'm Dave Namneth. I am a 2nd-year nursing student. I'm getting my RN license hopefully this summer, and just really excited to be here and create some sustainable change. And last we have Katrina Jimenez.
Yeah, I'm Katrina. I am a 2nd-year PA student in Connecticut, and I'm originally from Miami. And I'm really looking forward to tonight's webinar and really glad that I'm able to be a part of it. And we have a few housekeeping announcements before we get started with our panel. Just a reminder, please stay muted while the panelists are talking. We'll have an opportunity for a Q&A. So if you would like to speak, you can definitely talk at that point. Video is encouraged, but it's not required. You know, we're just trying to create a community feel here, kind of keep it conversational. So you're more than welcome to turn on your video. If you want to use the chat box to ask any questions or any comments or anything, please feel free. We'll be moderating that. And just so you're aware, this session is being recorded and it'll be up on the website a little bit later. All right. Health professions education may further perpetuate racial inequity. For example, using race as a proxy of pathology in medical education contributes to bias and unequal care. In what other ways has health professions education perpetuated systemic racism?
Okay, so I guess I can begin. Just to give a little bit of my thoughts about this, I think one of the biggest things about perpetuating systemic racism is just how the lack of representation that there is of patients of color, because with this lack of knowledge, at a certain point, if you aren't doing anything to actively fill in that gaps, you're being complicit in that. And something about something that is systemic, that's built on something, it has a history that you can track back to it, right? And if you're not actively working towards tracking back the systemic reason as to why there aren't enough patients of color, why are our textbooks centered around white patients, why is it that when, to just throw out an example, when we're learning about diverticulosis, for an example, and we're taught about when Western patients come in, what about the Asian community when it's shown on the right side? You know, a lot of Asian patients are rushed to the emergency room, open it up just to realize that, no, it's not appendicitis, you know, because it shows on the right side. And it's kind of just an aside, you know, a little side note on textbooks, and that's not okay. So if I don't see myself, right, in this, I'm thinking, like, what am I here for? And there's an article that LaShria Nelson wrote last summer about how it's titled like medical education is missing the bullseye, right? She uses Lyme disease as like a foundational thing because medical students are taught, okay, you got to find the bright red bullseye on the patient. You got to find it. But what if a patient is a darker complexion and it doesn't appear like that? And for a lot of Black and brown patients, it does not appear as a bright red bullseye. So you're going to miss it. You're going to constantly miss it, right? Because we need to deviate away from like standardizing medicine and the symptoms that we have to see and recognize that only appear on white patients. To the point where also a student called Malone Mukwende, I am so sorry if I pronounce his name wrong, but he's developing a handbook that portrays patients of colors, and it was all over social media. But the fact that he had to do that in the first place speaks to the institutional perpetuation of bias and unequal care. And we need to start talking about it so things can get done.
Thank you for that. Anything to add, Grace or Dow?
So for me, I kind of took the question to a different approach in that how I see that education kind of perpetuates systemic racism is that we are often taught, like, I think in an attempt to help like be more diverse or be more inclusive, we're always taught like, okay, like diabetes or cancer or any disease under the sun, like African Americans are often, they often have the highest rates of having the disease. But in that way, they're like, okay, well, we are, you know, trying to address the issue of like socioeconomic differences and health inequities. But at the same time, we're not always taught about like the rates at which race, like certain ethnicities die from diseases. So I remember in my undergrad, I did a research about like my local community in Houston and just around the nation too. And I see a lot how, you know, yes, African Americans do have the highest rates of cancer, of diabetes, hypertension, all of this, but there was a trend that I thought was that we're not taught in PA school, and that, you know, a lot of Asians and white Americans, you know, often die of cancer. And the way that I interpreted it was that they are able to live that long to the point that they get cancer, versus I feel like there's certain other ethnicities who, you know, die of pre-existing conditions like diabetes and hypertension. And I feel like there's like that gap of education there, and that, you know, yes, we are well aware of, you know, there's a lot of comorbidities out there, but then why is it that, you know, white and Asians are living a lot longer? And, you know, that comes down to like the socioeconomic standards, inequities, and health disparities that do exist in how we practice as well. So.
Right. So actually that kind of blends into our next question a little bit. Well, so how do these inequities in health professions, education potentially affect patient outcomes and community health?
So I can speak on that. Well said to my co-panelists. And I think Jay hit on this. Basically, if we don't know about it, we can't catch it and we won't be able to treat it. And that will just continue. We already know that getting into the medical field is difficult, the application process, having enough money to even apply. So being able to achieve this level of higher learning is already not something that all students are able to be afforded. And so if we're going into that and then we're not learning about these conditions, or we're not representing patients who may not have the same rash appear on their skin, it may be lighter or it may be more difficult to identify. We're not going to know to look for those things. We're not going to know to probe and ask certain questions. And we may also come in with our own biases, you know, how we were raised and what we've seen on TV and whatnot. So I think if we're not learning about it and we don't know that we should be looking out for these things, then we will miss it and our patients will suffer. You know, it'll be at our patient's expense. And it'll just take a lot of effort for us and for everyone to advocate for increased representation. Not just like a special lecture, like it should be integrated into our curriculum, and we should be actively working to seek out these things and these opportunities to share our patients and not treat them as a special case. Like this is not a one-time, you know, special scenario. Like this happens to patients all the time. Patients come in all the time with medical problems, and we need to be able to believe our patients and make sure that they get the care they deserve and set aside our own personal biases.
Yeah, like how you said, you know, it shouldn't just be a lecture, it needs to be integrated into our practice. And I think that's really interesting too, in that in terms of like how we are taught with like, so we have this thing called communication drills or standardized patient encounters where we need to address like A, B, C, D, you need to do these things to treat the patient. And I think the biggest thing that I'm a huge activist about is like lifestyle modifications and how, you know, instead of just taking a pill, you know, it's a whole team effort, a whole lifestyle change around diseases. And I feel like in a lot of our lectures, we're like, okay, we need to have this medication and then lifestyle modifications, and then they leave it at that. But it's like, how are these lifestyle modifications done? I feel like there's a lot of respect and passion for, you know, furthering research of certain medications or therapeutics, but not a lot of emphasis on, you know, going back to the basics of lifestyle changes, where the patient is living, how the patient is living. And I think there needs to be more emphasis in that, like both in our curriculum, but also more emphasis in that in like the surrounding communities and in like medicine in general too.
I'm glad you said that because Grace, I'm gonna piggyback off of you, and just give a little bit personal anecdote. So I went to see a doctor about an issue, right? And he wanted me to do some lifestyle modifications, but I was trying to explain to the doctor that it's quite difficult to do those lifestyle modifications because of where my school is and the amount of stress that I am as a medical student. But he threw back at me, well, you're a medical student, so you know how important this is, so you should prioritize it. And I think just making sure that health professionals understand that their patients might have a different lifestyle than they imagine for the patient, and you can't essentially force a patient to do what you think is best for that patient to do. You have to be in a position to step away from how patriarchal medicine can be. Like, I tell you what to do and you must listen, but okay, this is difficult for you. How can we work together so that we can get you closer to the goal to help your health? You know, make sure that you're listened to. And the thing about a lot of these inequities are intensified by the fact that doctors, as much as a lot of people want to save their patients and do well by their patients, sometimes you can cause harm to your patients by only fixating on your plan for the patient rather than incorporating the patient into the treatment plan, right? And I feel like Black and brown patients can also not be invited into the conversation if they're if they're deemed like if they haven't completed a certain level of education, or if they come from a certain community, or if they can't comprehend the medical jargon, right? Sometimes people forget that there was once upon a time before you became a doctor, before you became a nurse, before you became a PA student, that you didn't know these terms and you had to learn these terms, and you have to have grace with the people that you're treating. And you have to have an understanding of the people that you're treating, of their community, of their cultural diet, of where they come from, what's close to them, and stuff like that. So if we don't have health professionals truly engaged in their community, then there's going to be that gap, that distance. And I heard someone say this week that oftentimes people in academia like to intellectualize concepts rather than internalize them. And I was just like, wow, that is so true. That is so true. And then we develop this superficial like empathy, right? When we're taught to interact with our patients, where it's just to check off the box. Like, did you ask them, check off open-ended question. Sorry to hear that. How may I help you? Can you tell me more about that? But it's like, are we acting or do we really mean it, right? And you can say the right things, but is it just to get the perfect history, or is it really to care and understand about your patient, right? And sometimes it's hard to have those deep reflections because you want to think that you are, a good person doing it out of the richness of your heart, but we have to be self-critical about ourselves so that we could help our patients better.
Absolutely. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with that, for sure. All right. Many health professions institutions have implemented training on racism, unconscious bias, social determinants of health, etc. However, for many of us, it does seem
We have a little
to serve our patients and
technical gap.
communities.
You have to start over, Katrina.
Oh,
Cut out.
sorry.
It's all good.
Sorry, yeah, my bad. Many health professions institutions have implemented training on racism, unconscious bias, social determinants of health. However, for many of us, it does seem like the bare minimum. How can students, faculty, and administrators amplify this type of training so that we are better equipped to serve our patients and communities?
I don't know about everyone else, but I thought this question was kind of difficult to approach. It's like, obviously we want everyone to go out and do the work. But to me, I think that really making the effort to engage yourself in the community, engage yourself in these experiences that make you uncomfortable, that expose you to patients that you can learn from and will remember. I know for me, like we do these online trainings and you just kind of play the video and you let it play and then you click ahead and you don't really pay attention. And I think like with online trainings, even if you have online training for diversity and inclusion, it's very easy just to like click through the buttons and you're not actually internalizing any of the things that you're learning or you're supposed to be learning. But if you go out and you volunteer and you meet people who are not like you, who you would not see otherwise, and you get to know them beyond just, whatever they're there for. So for us at Yale, we have a student-run free clinic. So we see patients on Saturdays. And I've had plenty of patients that I've met that have stuck with me. I've learned like there are several patients who can't come to treatment because they don't have transportation. And sometimes they're 2 or 3 hours late and we're like, oh, why are they late? They're late because they don't have a car and they had to wait an hour for the bus and the bus finally dropped them off. And I think for us as students and future providers, it's easy for us to get mad at the patient. Like, why didn't they do this? Like, why can't they take their medication? Why are they doing this? But it's because we don't know what they're going through. We don't know that, don't have a car, or maybe they didn't get their paycheck and they can't afford the medication, or they forgot, or they have other things going on. And I think for me, at least, to really understand and really be able to grapple with the idea that there are these ongoing issues, I have to really immerse myself into it. I can't just read a story because it won't stick. And you'll, like throughout my clinical rotations, I've met plenty of people who have made me cry. And I think when I think of them, I cry because it's so emotional. But I think those experiences are what will make people remember, not just some story that you read and then you watch a video and then you take a quiz just for the sake of it. And I think it's something that requires effort and work and continuing to challenge some of your own beliefs and what you're comfortable with. You know, if you're not comfortable being around people who look different than you, or who, you know, may not have access to all the services that you do. So they're a little bit, you know, their clothing is ripped or their shoes aren't as clean. I think exposing yourself to these patients and really acting with empathy is important. And it's something that we should all strive to do.
I guess piggybacking off of that, I feel like my program is the same in a lot of ways, that we have all these certifications where I am ashamed to say that I just, like many students do, play it in the background, like press forward, answer the questions, and just turn it in because we have like so many other things to do. I guess for us, I'm the diversity chair of my PA student government. And so I do this thing where every month we have a diversity series talk where we focus on a certain topic. So last month it was about like women in medicine. We've done LGBTQ. We've done plenty other ones where we share our stories, and kind of, I feel like that has a deeper connection, both like within the class, since we know each other really well, versus like Dow said, like reading from a book or listening to a video. And I will say that we also have a body, mind, spirit class where we do have people who identify as LGBTQ or as women come talk about their experiences. But I think like it shouldn't just be limited to like, I identify as Asian, so I have like this duty to talk about my experience as an Asian woman. You know, I feel like there needs to be something done, or for me to learn how to empathize with people from other backgrounds without having to hear from that, if that makes sense. So I think that's kind of what my like diversity series have been more about, just to see like if I can draw experiences from patients I saw before going to PA school. I think that would be beneficial to my cohort, so that they don't have to wait until someone else to talk about it, if that makes sense.
I definitely love what you say about not just being a part of the community that's being harmed and standing up for yourself in a time when you feel like people aren't standing up for you, but even if it doesn't personally affect you, the fact that the issue is at hand for another community, it should bother you. And so you should stand up for that. So I totally agree with you in that sense. I was thinking about this question in a more like institutional base, right? How can institutions who implement these training on diversity, unconscious bias, how can they do better? What's beyond that? And I was thinking about how the institutions have to foster an environment where we could essentially call people out. You know, you have to call people out and hold them accountable. And when you're in a profession that's supposed to be healing, right? You kind of have this pseudo thought that I'm a good person and I can't do harm. Well, that's not the case. Good people do harm all of the time, right? But when you are afraid to admit that you've done something wrong and accept the consequences of it, you perpetuate even more harm, right? Because the person who you have hurt, you're kind of taking away their voice, turning the attention on you, making you the victim in the situation, and saying, I'm not a bad person. You know what I'm saying? And so the person feels like they have to shut down, right? So essentially, I feel like institutions need to strive towards restorative justice, right? Because essentially, When harm done, justice is required to repair that. And all parties need to be involved together in that work to decide how that should go, right? It's kind of difficult to create a space for an offender. I understand somebody who's perpetuated harm, abused their power. It's kind of hard to think about how can they ever return to the community that they've hurt, right? While the person who is hurt is still recovering. But I think that we talk about abolishing like the police sometimes, or abolishing like criminality, right? And when crimes or like offenses is only punishable by ostracizing the person who did it, first of all, they're not going to come out, they're not going to be genuine about the fact that they're not going to want to accept any consequences because they feel like it's going to ruin their lives, right? And so we need people who hurt other people there needs to be a consequence. There needs to be some type of consequence, whether it's a professionalism mark, or whether it's taking a step down, or whether it is stepping away from a position. That needs to happen because a person needs to know that you can't hurt somebody and there be no consequence. However, there needs to be constant training of how do I become a better person after I stepped out from this position? I need to take courses. I need to speak to people. I need to actively work better. So maybe if I have a professionalism mark, I could work over a year to remove that professionalism mark and then enter back into society. Okay, maybe after a year of community training and I understand like, okay, this is wrong and my bias was wrong because I've worked with these people. I know that, and I can come back and say like, hey, I did what was wrong and I did the work to fix that. And I want to come back and kind of like bless the community I've once hurt, right? And then we also need to listen to victims or people who were hurt, actually genuinely listen to them and protect them rather than the reputation of the abuser or the offender or something like that. And this needs to be for students and faculty. Faculty don't get a pass. You don't get a pass. We're all people trying to do better in this world. So if a faculty member says something in the classroom setting that offends a student, they need to be able to publicly apologize. And it happened in my year. Quick story, and then I'll wrap this up. There's a student who hurt my entire classroom. We came together, had a forum. He publicly apologized. I think did some work within himself. And then when everything was going down into the summer, I realized that that student learned from how he hurt his community, and I saw his growth. And I'm willing to like forgive him, you know what I mean? Because there was that work done. But it's a really touchy topic, but I think that's a step that people should strive to go to.
That's beautifully said. I think having that, keeping the conversation going, right, and allowing people the opportunity to grow and change themselves. That way, we can't just throw them out. You know, we can reintroduce them. So we have one more question before we go on our break. So it's often Black and brown professional students have to advocate for themselves and their parents and or community, lead the calls for change, and educate their peers instead of health professions institutions keeping themselves taking up these tasks. So what sort of reforms, this kind of goes off the last question, what kind of reforms specifically would help to ease this burden and provide accountability for institutions? And if we feel like we've already answered this, then that's okay.
Kind of going off of what Jaleesa said of like, you know, holding institutions accountable, I feel like it would be really cool to see institutions, she kind of spoke on this too, like about like unlearning certain things and just acknowledging like what was done before and why it wasn't right, and just kind of learning the history of like medicine itself is very racist, and medicine itself is very sexist. Just looking at the syphilis trial, or like the father of gynecologists, and like all of these things that have been done in the history of medicine. I feel like we learn about that on our own, but either from like word of mouth or from like social media, but I feel like I've never really seen an institution educate on that solely. And I know we have so many things to learn about in med school or PA school in general, but you know, I think there is a way to implement like the history of medicine, how we came to where we are today, and I think that will you know, help a lot of people unlearn, you know, maybe previous bias that they've had before.
I completely agree. I love that. And just to keep it short, but reiterate what I said, there needs to be zero tolerance policies for racial insensitivity, for there needs to be like public apologies for wrongdoing that needs to be normalized. Like there needs to be professional marks both on students and professors that offend people, but I also do think that there needs to be constant work for people who do have professionalism marks to work towards removing those marks, and not just racial insensitivity, but like classism and racism and like gender biases, or all of them. You know what I'm saying? We just need to be more aware. Oh, sorry. One last note. Also, institutions need to think about not burdening, like putting the burden on the students to call them out all the time. And they need to be reflective without asking students to join workshops and groups and all that stuff when we have to work to get our degree.
Or do climate surveys every 3 months.
Exactly. Every survey. So institutions need to be more reflective.
And just to finish it off, I completely agree. And I think that one, we need to be incorporating more just a diverse population of people so that schools don't need to just pick out the like 2 diverse students to highlight. And it's something that they get to benefit from. Like, these are our diverse students. And it's a work in progress, and the institutions just have to continue to work at it. And they need to be able to understand that they have to support their students, but they can't, tokenize them for being who they are, because they are making this institution look better because they are diverse. But it's not going to happen overnight. So we'll just keep chugging along, and hopefully we'll get there.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Dow, about not tokenizing students in their quest to follow out this. All right, everyone. So we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll be back for part 2 of our panelist Q&A, and then we'll open up the Q&A to the audience after that. So see you in 5 minutes. All right, everyone, welcome back. Before we continue on with our Q&A, just wanted to highlight some of the comments that have come into the chat. Arthur's had a couple good ones. I think something that he said that I think is important is just kind of understanding why discrepancy exists, and just he kind of included a good article there that I think we can all take a look at. And just Tatiana talking about some of how some providers are now including cultural aspects while conducting assessments, but fall short in recognizing the importance when implementing treatment. So I can agree with that. And Arthur, again, just saying how the diversity, equity, and inclusion departments in higher ed institutions should be taking the lead in making sure that employees and leadership are educated on implicit bias, privilege, and standards of professional behavior, which I agree it should be like that, but you know, sometimes it's not, unfortunately, but ideally they would be, you know. Yeah. All right, so I think let's go ahead and get started with the second part of our panel.
Let's do it. So let's start with our first question, the second half. Do you feel that health professions institutions should probe an applicant's awareness of the implication of systemic inequity within various social structures, such as the healthcare system, education system, justice system, and so on, in an attempt to compose a student body that is conscious of the potential role that race has on health, social mobility, and access?
Absolutely. I think that, as Grace mentioned earlier, you know, we're learning a lot in PA school and medical school. We can't learn absolutely every single detail there is to know. And it doesn't, just because you learn it once doesn't mean it'll stick. An example is I'm on a committee right now to reform our diversity and inclusion statement. And we sent out a survey about to students, faculty, alumni, about what they want to see. And we went through them, looked at kind of the comments, and a lot of the comments were about, you know, making a more inclusive space, making sure that students feel welcome. And my specific theme that I was looking for was admissions. And there were comments that said, we don't want to fill just a quota. We want to make sure that these students are up to the standard to take care of patients. And I thought that was interesting because it's based on the assumption that because this person is diverse, that they are also not capable, or somehow they're an exception. And diversity does not affect merit. Just because someone's diverse does not mean that they're fitting a quota. You are capable of being diverse and worthy and competent enough to fit into these roles. And I think that that idea that we are just filling quotas, or we are just doing this for the sake of being diverse, is troubling to me, that people think that, or that minorities just are an exception and they get in because of what they look like or their circumstances. But people work hard, and there are plenty of people I know, and I'm a first generation college student. Like I had no idea how to fill out the FAFSA. I taught myself how to do it. And there are plenty of people who struggle to get where they are, and they deserve to be there. And they didn't get there because, you know, they fit some box. And I think it's really important that people know that, because if you don't know that your peers actually worked hard to get here, or they got here just because you think that they got here because they look a certain way or they came from a certain background, you're going to carry those biases when you take care of patients, and that's going to hurt everyone, yourself included. And so I think it's very important to understand. I think that we don't need everyone to be perfect, you know, we're all learning all the time, but I think coming in with the idea that you're willing to learn, as Jay mentioned, it's a process, and you need to be willing to learn and to change some of the ideas that you have that may be hurtful to other people.
I wanted to, so when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking how interesting it would be for institutions to probe an applicant's awareness when I think that institutions need to actively probe their own awareness in their role in systemic inequality, right? And, ideally, like I really love social mission frameworks, but there's not nearly enough institutions that embody these social mission frameworks and make it a principle. It's more like maybe a bullet point, maybe, but it's not like their framework. So I think that speaks volumes to the gatekeeping of information that would lead to an applicant even being aware about this, and who gatekeeps this information? Institutions. So there's a reason why a lot of people in high school, they don't learn about systemic inequality. They don't know where it comes from. They might experience it, they might recognize it, but they're not taught to be aware about it because it's their lived experience. So it's sad and unfortunate, but sometimes it's internalized, right? So the process of unlearning for these applicants are a big deal, right? So I feel like maybe probing an applicant's willingness to be aware about these implications and having institutions actively be the leader and be the example and teach students to be aware of these things is what I'm feeling right now.
Yeah, I completely agree with Jaleesa. And, I'm from Texas and I currently go to school in Arizona. And I feel like I did grow up in a very conservative environment where like a lot of like systemic racism or just like injustices in general were very not talked about. Like, I don't know how else to say it, and I think it wasn't until I went to college where like I was able to kind of be exposed to, how race and politics are really integrated into medicine and health. And I feel like growing up, like science was just science and like social studies was just social studies. Like it was two separate like entities, but that's really not the case. And I think it is important that a lot of institutions ask about, whether applicants are aware of how race and politics have to do with medicine. But also, like Jaleesa said, like showing the willingness to learn about it too. And, I think it's wild to think that like, people still think that we have to meet a quota just because. I think, that can be unlearned. It really does come down to the institution being willing to teach how to unlearn, if that makes sense.
Definitely, yeah. All right. So what part does representation play in healthcare education?
In all the parts, all of the parts, the students, the teachers, the lecturers, history, deans, literally all of them. This question made me think. So last summer, I had the opportunity to be an intern for BFA, and I was so blessed with the opportunities. And one of the interns kind of spearheaded us looking into the diversity among deans nationwide. And it was interesting to see how underrepresented marginalized populations are within these leadership positions, which is not surprising, but it's still disheartening, because deans have power to shift the atmosphere of their institution. So, and unfortunately, the burden of doing these cultural shifts tend to be on the backs of the communities who are impacted the most. Because in our research, we found that HBCUs produce the most amount of Black physicians, right? And if you take out Latina like universities and medical schools produce a large amount of Hispanic doctors. So if you take them out of the equation, the disparity is even worse, right? So it's like representation matters because it shouldn't just be on the backs of the people who feel underrepresented to like do the work, right? And there's so many like obstacles that ostracize like patients, physicians, and leaders from marginalized communities to even get into like these medical fields. There's you know what I'm saying, the lack of like pipeline programs and resources in certain communities make it hard for people to even like climb this ladder to be represented in the first place. So we can't just be like, oh, there's not enough like Black and Asian and Hispanic and LGBTQ deans. There's not enough of them. Oh, that's so sad. But it's just, you have to go back. Why isn't there enough? Like, is it a resource problem? All right, let's put the resource in. Is it the fact that like when we're distributing information about these positions, we distribute it in places where these communities aren't found? We need to go into the communities and be like, hey, there's an opportunity. Here it is. We need to go back all the way, linking like all these systems, just like educational, politics, and health systems together, work together in order so we can solve these problems that lead to lack of representation in the first place.
I don't really know if I can follow that up because that was very well said. But I think that's exactly the problem. And I think it's very easy for us to think, you know, oh, why is this class not as diverse, or what are we doing wrong? But we have to go back because one, like for PA school, it is our deposits, at least when I applied, they were like $1,000 and you don't get them back. So if you didn't have just $1,000 to hold your place, then, you know, sorry, you can't hold your spot. And we have to think back at, you know, what kind of resources do people have? How are we making the application process accessible? These test scores, the cost to send your transcripts, the cost to apply, plus the extra cost, I don't know, some electronic fee that finds its way in there. There are so many things that just add up. And if you are unable to even do that, and they tell you, you know, when you apply, you can't just apply to one school. Well, what do you do if you don't have just endless amounts of money to apply to a bunch of schools? You will not be able to apply, and then you will not get in. But that's not because you aren't smart enough to get in. That's because the circumstances that you are in did not allow you to do that. Or, you know, you weren't taught that there are scholarships for these things. You just didn't know. So you can't go out and do that for yourself. And I think if we really want to improve representation, to make students feel like they are worthy of achieving these things, that they're not the exception, that, you know, just because you're the one minority student that got in, like you are not special, like you deserve to be here. And other people who look like you also deserve to be here. And it's not a coincidence that you're here, like you deserved it and you are capable of doing this. We need to give students that opportunity. And so it starts like way back, way back than we're willing to accept sometimes. And I think it's easy to say like, oh, you know, it's too expensive, they couldn't afford it, they didn't save for it. But we don't know how many people are working extra jobs, saving up, not doing certain things to be able to apply. And if you don't get in the first time, you have to do it again. And it's a lot of work and time. And we don't always think about that. So I think there's plenty to do to change.
All right, let's go to the next one. So in terms of reforming our respective institutions or programs, what are some first steps that students should take?
So some first steps that I would think is, first and foremost, check in with yourself. You need to check in with yourself to see that you're mentally capable to do this work, when I say mentally capable, not on an intelligence basis, but on an emotional basis, because it can be taxing to engage in this work of wanting reform. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a marathon. So you have to continuously check in with yourself. Second, because it's hard and it's a very long process, you need to find a support group, right? So you need to have like friends, peers, professors, and deans who will support you in your ideas and listen to you. And then I would say maybe if there's a work group on your school that you can voice your opinions on, maybe join it, or maybe encourage your friend who's more vocal than you to join it, or maybe just listen in. And then I would also think like to offer up the idea of like uniting clubs and organizations on your campus or nearby on this feat with you. So maybe writing a letter to administration about things that they can improve on or they can't, so it's not one person who might get the like institutional retaliation for daring to speak up, but it's a collective working together, or maybe a group of representatives from these organizations requesting to meet with the deans, because there is strength in numbers. And that's just like a few that I thought of off the top of my head. So I'm just going to pass it on to my fellow panelists because I'm sure they have brilliant ideas as well.
Yeah, I like the idea. I think it was Dow who said it earlier to get uncomfortable. I think a lot of times in like the diversity series that I host, I always say like, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because these topics are not your everyday cup of tea. Like these are very, like Jaleesa said, they're very taxing and, it can be emotionally heavy. But I think being able to embrace yourself in it and also just immersing yourself into the community too, and just seeing how like other people think. It may not be exactly like your thoughts may not align, but that's probably a good thing so that you can see how other people, where they're coming from, how they're forming these opinions and kind of how to move forward with that, whether that opinion is good or bad, because that is how you learn and that is how you are going to obtain like the audience, which may not normally be obtained from what's going on right now, if that makes sense. Like I think we have gone forward a lot in society, but it's also like we have so much more to do. But how do we get these people who are still kind of, I don't want to like stuck in their old ways, but like who haven't really been, who haven't been unlearning to unlearn themselves? Like how do we get those people? Because until those people are willing to unlearn or change, we're not going to be able to go forward. So just kind of acknowledging that is kind of a good first step, I guess.
Yeah, and I would just emphasize this is an ongoing thing, and I think taking care of yourself is a big priority. Respecting your own boundaries and taking care of yourself, because this isn't something we're doing it in addition to, our stressful schooling, but it's something that we'll have to continue to do, and we can't spread ourselves too thin to the point where we burn out and give up, because it's an endless fight. Because we see all the time, there's just like a wave where everyone's like really into it and then it dies down. But we have to keep going, and it's a lot of energy. I know like for us, we're in the middle of political rotations and that gets hectic. And sometimes I myself am guilty of it. I just kind of zone out of everything and do schoolwork, but I'm lucky to be able to do that. I'm lucky to be able to kind of take a breath and forget that there are other things happening, but not everyone's able to have that privilege. And but I do remember that I have to take care of myself, because if I can't, then I can't do the work. But it's exhausting. And so we need to be able to take it slowly and find support, and we'll get there.
Definitely. I think everything that you three said was just, perfect for that. And Tiffany kind of wrote in the chat box, and I agree, that these first steps are catered to well-being of the student, because a lot of times we forget about ourselves when we're working towards reform. And I think that's really important. We do have to take care of ourselves while we're on this journey, for sure. All right, and our last question for this portion. How can health professions institutions better support their marginalized students and take on a bigger role in eliminating structural inequity at the institutional level?
Since I feel like this whole conversation that we've been having really caters to that question, I'm going to keep this one kind of short and sweet. They need to listen, take accountability, execute, and repeat. Do it over and over and over because the work is never done and there's always improvement to be had.
I second that.
And I third that, so I would say that's a great summary.
Awesome. Let's go on to some chat box questions. So what are some self-care strategies you practice in your advocacy while also being a health profession student?
I guess for me, journaling has really helped. I used to hate writing, but I have now realized that like writing my thoughts down and just like word vomiting on pages of nothing has helped me a lot, or just taking the time out to be alone, really. I think, especially in medicine, like I'm sure we're all people's persons. Like we love to be like deal with like customer service or have hospitality. And I think it's easy for us to kind of get into the weeds of like, we always have to cater towards someone else, to the point that like you kind of lose of like having time to yourself. So just having, spending some time alone and kind of re-energizing that way has really helped me.
I would say one thing that's really random that I picked up was roller skating. So, I mean, I've always liked to roller skate, but I never felt like I had the time to do it. I was either always on my campus or studying, running to meeting to meeting. So in the hectic of quarantine, I just, happened to have more time because I'm a commuter, so I didn't have to commute. That gives me a good like 2 to 4, 6 hours back into my life. And I've never really had a hobby before. And so just doing this and like roller skating, meeting new people through it, just across the nation was really nice. And not only that, but also just checking up on myself more and my fellow like peers and classmates, even talking to people and connecting with people that I've been in class with for years that I've never really like spoken to, and like making these group chats and just checking in on people, checking in with yourself, asking people like, how are you when you're filled up, and taking the time to like step away when you need to replenish yourself. Yeah, so I would say find a hobby that you like to do. If it's nap, if it's eat, if it's Netflix, do that. And just constantly check in.
Yeah, I'll just watch like TV and sit on the couch for a little bit, and I'm okay with that. But I also like to go to the gym, and for a while I felt bad, like, oh, I have to study, I don't have time. But then I wouldn't go, and then I'd be like, oh, I wish I went, and I feel bad that I didn't go. So I make an effort to go, and I tell myself, like I don't need to be studying 24/7 because that's not conducive to, being a good, normal, healthy person. So I allow myself to do that. I allow myself to, just sit there and talk to my roommates, or just sit and not do anything for a little bit, when I'm feeling overwhelmed or I need to take a break, because we all need that, whether we recognize it or not. So just hanging out, making time for things that are important to me as a person and not just to me as a student, or to me as, whatever role I am filling. Like I am also a person who is allowed to do things for myself too.
All right, so we've got another question from the chat. How have your respective institutions handled news regarding violence against Asian and Pacific Islanders and matters involving police brutality against Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities? Do you ever feel that the responses are performative rather than genuine?
I would say it's kind of like halfway for my program. I think I feel like it's important for institutions to acknowledge it. That's like the first step. And I would like to say most institutions have at least acknowledged it. For me, it's gotten to the point where it does feel a little bit more like, okay, they're doing it because they have to, but they're not really, I don't see the effort in moving to that next step. So like kind of what I said before about like, I think as a society, we've moved somewhat forward, but we're not doing like, okay, what can I do to be better? Not versus like, I feel like a lot of institutions are, okay, we've done it. And it's like a checkbox kind of way. That makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I see the emails, and it's well written most times. And it's like, okay, so this is going on in the world. And then it's kind of like, that's it. So it makes you question like whether institutions are being performative. A lot are, I will admit that. Kind of like Dad had mentioned earlier, how you see when it's trendy, people are engaged, and then afterwards, when it's not trending, it dies down. And I think what would be telling for me is that getting that email or having some type of like acknowledgement when it's not the headliners, that means you're still thinking about it, even if it's not a news headline, and I feel like that's the first step after, you know what I mean? I feel like that's the next step, showing
Right.
us that you're thinking about it when no one else is thinking about it. I don't know if that makes sense, but
I have a question based on that. Have any of you guys experienced a thing where the administration says, okay, have the professors talk to their students about this and have breakout groups and chat about their feelings and express like how horrible they feel, or and let them start the grieving process? Because no one. Okay, yeah, me neither.
So I have something to say. So our program, so Yale's PA program is under the umbrella of the School of Medicine. And so more specifically last year, there was a very long delay before we heard it. I think it was like 2 weeks or something before we heard anything from our program about the killing of George Floyd. And it's gotten a lot better. Since then we've had, various listening circles, but I think the problem is that they were so focused on saying the perfect thing, being so eloquent with their words, that they said nothing at all. And silence for 2 weeks is very loud for students who are very confused. And there was just a lot of miscommunication within that. And I think it's gotten a lot better, but I think it's hard, especially when the institution is not used to reacting to this, and they want to seem genuine, but then they're thinking about what they're going to say, and then it takes too long, so they don't say anything at all. And so we had to really like push and say, please say something instead of saying nothing. Even if it's not perfect, because none of us are perfect, if it comes out wrong, you can always explain and let us know kind of your thought process. And everyone's learning, so no one's going to be perfect, but it's been quite the battle. And it's something that I was surprised but not surprised about. And it's been something that we've been working on slowly but surely. But it's very, so to me, now we're getting the emails more quickly, But as you guys mentioned, there is stuff beyond just getting the email. But I think for us, it's a big step, because before we weren't getting anything. And I think thinking too much about how to say things correctly, we forget that to do anything at all in the first place. So.
Yeah, beautifully said. Tiffany asks, along those lines, how can institutions do better to console the community of students that are emotionally, physically, and mentally burdened by the injustices happening every day?
So I actually do remember that earlier my institution used to have community Zoom calls to talk about whatever you want to talk about at a set time every time, which was okay at first. I think it would be better if there was a sense of like trust and comfortability amongst everyone. And I guess, institutions could work on fostering that. And I really, really love the Dean of Diversity at my school. She's so amazing. And so that's great. But I feel like institutions could do better at consoling community of students by their policies and inclusivity all of the time, not just some of the time. And so when institutions show students that they care if you have issues, if they care about the social determinants that affect your learning environment in the same way that they're teaching you to care about the social determinants that's going to affect your patients. I think that's very important. I think also in consoling students, you need to be able to like provide genuine support and listen. So say, for example, if a student, to give an example, if a student doesn't do well on an exam, right? And they're coming to you, speaking to you, maybe take time to ask a student how they're doing as a person before you address the test taking techniques that they need to do to improve, to do better on the next test. I think that's such a minor thing that a lot of professors don't engage with when discussing with their students after something like that happens. And it's a big thing. And I didn't realize that it was an issue that professors didn't do that until so I have a concentration in biomedical sciences and a concentration in Black studies. And when I tell you the experience from these two departments are very different. And the director of the Black studies department had a one-on-one conversation with me. And she said, hold up, before we even discuss your paper, how are you doing as a person? I was surprised because I've never experienced that before. I feel like that should be the norm though. And that's all I want to say about that.
Yeah, like going off of genuinity, I think, we talk about like, how can institutions do this? How can institutions do that? Like that's important. And I think, I feel like a lot of professors, faculty, workers, they depend on that like institutional announcement to be like, okay, well, they did that. So I, as a person, like, I don't really have to do much because my institution like addressed it and I fall under that category. I think, how we can as a whole, like console the community. I think it comes down to like that faculty member or like your department alone. So for us, like the PA program falls under, I think like health sciences. And so we have, and at AT still have different campuses across the country. So there's one in Missouri, one in Arizona, and one in California. And I feel like a lot of our announcements and stuff and our webinars that are provided about like racism and what's going on is through the campus in Missouri. And like, I feel like that's so disingenuous for the Mesa campus because like, I don't know a single person in Missouri. And, I kind of wish that our faculty or the people that I work with every single day would at least say something about it versus than just like that small talk that we have every so often. I feel like it's so disconnecting. So I think, yeah, a way that the community could come together is it starts like by that one person or like that one person in your department would do a lot.
Yeah, I think just thinking about students as humans outside of the student role, and making sure that they are okay as a person first, before we really dive into the intricacies of, you know, like Jaleesa said, the test or a paper, because there could be other things going on. They are grieving or just emotionally worn down. And those aren't, you know, like physical. You don't see that someone is exhausted from talking about the same things over and over again, or seeing the same thing on the news over and over again. And it's draining, and it's draining to even think about. So just because you don't know, or they look fine, or like they were doing so well and then what happened, I think just checking in as a person, beyond kind of the academics, is really important to do. And just to get to know your students as people, and kind of being able to have that connection, because it's hard to open up to someone who is assigned to be your advisor, or what have you, and you've never had a conversation with them. You don't know how much to even tell them, because how will you know that they will support you? And so I think building those connections early on, and creating a space where students are comfortable talking about anything, just about themselves, and then maybe they'll dive deeper if they want to. But I think creating space for students as people, not just students, is important.
Well said. All right, so we've got just one last question, and for the panelists, some of you have talked about some of the things that you've been doing. So really just want to know, I mean, is there anything that you're a part of, that you're working on, that pertains, you know, to any disparities in healthcare that you just maybe like to talk about and share with us? Just highlight some of the work that you're doing.
So for PA school, we have to do a thesis. And for my thesis, I received a fellowship to carry out the project. So usually it's just hypothetical. You do a literature review. But for me, I received a fellowship to study palliative care in the emergency department in Uganda. So palliative care, for those who don't know, is comfort care for patients who have a life-limiting illness, and it's usually in conjunction with some kind of treatment. And then within that would be hospice. So hospice is you have 6 months approximately for your prognosis, and you stop treatment. So you're not pursuing life-saving measures. And palliative care in a country such as Uganda, where the resources are limited, is really important, because patients who come to the emergency department, when we think of the emergency department here, we think, you know, you come and it's an emergency, so you want to do everything you can to save the person's life. But sometimes, especially in an area where you don't have an overabundance of technology or medication or supplies or staff, perhaps the route is to explore what the patient wants and what needs we can provide them for comfort, instead of pursuing every possible exhaustive option to keep them alive. And so that's what I'm doing, and just looking at what needs patients have as they come in to the emergency department, and how we can best serve the patient's needs, given the resources and the environment that they're in.
That's literally amazing. So I'm wishing you well wishes on all that you accomplish. For me, so I just finished my last, how do I even describe it? My last year as the mentoring director of this program called HPrep, which stands for Health Professions Recruitment Exposure Program. I think that's the right order. So it basically exposes high schoolers to different health professions that they probably normally wouldn't be exposed to, depending on their socioeconomic background or what school they come from or whatever the case may be, and caters to like marginalized students from marginalized communities. And so now that it's my last year transfer of power doing that, I was thinking that I currently have the mental space to engage in bringing awareness and the lack of representation in medical education in our lectures, which is kind of scary to tell my professors, hey, here's how you improve your lectures. Include me in the pictures, please. It's kind of difficult to do that without making them feel kind of bad. But I think it's important if we are working towards a social mission framework that it's to be okay with being uncomfortable. And so far they're very receptive. So I'm glad that my school is receptive to my ideas, and also dismantling the elitist persona that plagues just health professions. You're looked at differently if you fail. You're looked at differently if you're close to failing, and that shouldn't be the case. If anything, we need to move away from solely praising the students who do well and ignoring the students who don't, and blaming the students for not being able to have the best test taking techniques to do well in the class, or maybe the classroom environment doesn't really cater to all the different learning styles that are available. Just advocating for the students, I kind of just feel like they aren't enough, because just, I don't know, you know what I'm saying? Like when we are like taught that we have to have the best grades all the time, and so when you don't, you kind of feel like, what am I doing here? Like imposter syndrome like festers, and we need to do away with that. We need to provide support for the students who need it the most, period. That's it.
Yeah, I love that. That is amazing. And also, like, I can resonate 100% with that imposter syndrome right now. I guess something that I'm kind of working on is I recently got into the Doctorate of Medical Science program through what I'm doing now. So I'll start my first year as a doctorate student during my second year as a clinical student. I do have to think of like a capstone / thesis that is still undertaking, because I have no idea what I want to do. Haven't really thought about it, not at that point in my life yet. But I do have a small idea of like, I know right now like Asian Americans are they are the most undiagnosed for diabetes. And I think a lot of that comes with like how BMI is used at a certain threshold before you start screening for diabetes. I think number one, BMI is like BS, but also so oops, but just kind of how to better screen for Asian Americans in general, because I think, like, for example, my dad, I had been telling him for years, number one, he's super stubborn in general and hates being like going to the doctor, but it was interesting how he wasn't really diagnosed with diabetes until the age of 73, after he had like all these kidney issues. So it's one of those like, I think it really hits me pretty hard with that, but how do we prevent that from happening in the future? So that's not really working on it, but I intend to do it. So we'll see.
Super impressive, all of you. And I wish you all luck. That's awesome. It's just really good to see kind of the future of healthcare in this room right now. So let's go ahead and open up some questions. If people want to turn on their mic, we'll take like 2 or 3 questions just to respect everyone's time, since we kind of slotted 90 minutes. So if we have any other questions, go ahead and speak up. Or if you want to chat. All right. Cool. So thanks everyone for joining us tonight then. We'd like to thank the Beyond Flexner Alliance Student Assembly and the Organization for Associate's Degree in Nursing for putting all this together. And we'd like to also thank our awesome panelists for taking the time to be part of this webinar, and to everyone who spoke tonight. right? And thank you for your bravery and candidness and honesty. And as a result of tonight's webinar, the BFA Student Assembly will develop a written guide for health professions institutions on how to better uplift and protect marginalized students within health professions education. So the contents of that guide will be derived from the ideas expressed during tonight's webinar. And also just another announcement is that if you're interested in being involved in the Student Assembly or applying to the upcoming fellowship, visit the beyondflexner.org/student assembly for more information. And with that, if Shalini or Tiffany have anything else to say, we can wrap it up.
That was amazing, you guys. I have to say that was awesome. Thank you all.
I think Tiffany wanted to say something.
Oh, I was just saying this was a super amazing space to be a part of, to hear everybody's experiences, and a lot of your